Our next speaker is Dr. Marlon Pragnell. He's a senior scientist of continued glucose therapies with JDRF. Dr. Pragnell is an internationally recognized expert in the area of diabetes technologies and has been a leader of JDRF's Artificial Pancreas Project. All right, Dr. Pragnell.
Well, thank you very much. It's great to be here and talk to you a bit about what JDRF is doing, all the exciting research that we've been bringing forward with funding in Type 1. So I'm Marlon Pragnell. I've been at JDRF since 2007. I have a PhD in neuroscience. Prior to JDRF, I was working at Genzyme Biotech in renal and metabolic diseases. And I've been primarily working in the JDRF Artificial Pancreas Project, and I'll talk a bit more about that. But also two areas I've been working on is our drug therapies to improve glucose control. These are non-device-based approaches with an interest in prevention of hypoglycemia and hypoglycemia unawareness, and also to some diabetic nephropathy work. And actually, that's what we're going down to DC for the steering committee on Pearl on Tuesday. My personal connection with type 1 diabetes, I have lots of friends with type 1. I've been working at JDRF now since 2007, and many of my workmates have type 1 diabetes. And also to my personal connection is you, to meet all of you and to talk to you and to understand what the issues are and work towards research to try and prevent and cure and treat the disease. So with that in mind, I want to talk to you a bit about our vision for a world without type 1 diabetes, where we take type 1 to type none. So JDRF funds the discovery and development of therapies to reduce the complexity of the disease, all the injections, the measurement of blood glucose, the burden for both patients and their parents, their families, to make it less invasive, and also to reduce the danger of the disease as well in terms of hypoglycemia and hyperglycemia. So why is this so important? Why is it critical right now? Why do we need to spend this effort to try and tackle type 1 diabetes? Well, right now there are 1.25 million people here in the States who have type 1 diabetes. 40,000 more people each year are diagnosed with type 1. And it's quite serious because in the first decade of the century, from 2001 to 2009, there was a 21% increase in the amount of type 1 diabetes. This is really an urgent situation. We're thinking maybe by 2050, we're going to have 5 million people with type 1. And the burden on the healthcare system, right now, it's approximately $14 billion per year. Importantly as well, the 1.25 million people in this country, only about 1/3 of them are managing or are reaching their blood glucose levels. So 2/3 are experiencing high levels of hypoglycemia. It's estimated that for an average person with type 1 diabetes, they spend 10 hours per day above 180 and 1 hour per day below 180, below 70. So it's a very important and critical issue to focus on. So JDRF is very different from other organizations because we spread our assets and effort and focus across the whole spectrum of the science. We call it working the pipeline, where from discovery research all the way through to reimbursement, getting the therapies to people. For example, in discovery research, we bring together scientists, the best possible scientists in the world, from stellar institutions. We bring them together in networks, consortia, to tackle these questions, difficult questions about type 1, to develop these discoveries. Translational development, those discoveries, we work with companies, for example, to kind of make sure that the therapies, these ideas are translated into potential approaches for type 1. We have people that go to Capitol Hill to talk to the FDA to make sure that there's a regulatory path forward for these discoveries, these therapeutic approaches, and also, too, that they get reimbursed and people have access to them. So we focus on the whole spectrum. It's an absolute priority to bring these therapies to patients. And type 1 diabetes, it's a complex disease, and there's no one-size-fits-all for therapies, for the approach to cure, treat, and prevent. So we're investing in a broad portfolio of activities. And so these are our focus areas, where we spend all of our time to develop and test and bring forward therapeutic approaches. Artificial pancreas, complications, encapsulation, glucose control, or restoration and prevention. And last year, we spent $98 million of funds in these areas. And these, I believe, are money actually quite well spent because we have leveraged a tremendous amount of other support to get these activities forward. For example, in artificial pancreas, we spent $16 million last year in efforts here to accelerate the development and progress of artificial pancreas systems. And I'm sure many of you are aware of what the artificial pancreas is, but just to go over, it comprises of a continuous glucose sensor, an insulin pump, and a control algorithm software that links the pump and sensor. So you could be wearing your CGM and wearing your pump. The CGM will provide information on what you'll do is look at that, and you'll decide how much insulin you want to deliver. The idea behind the artificial pancreas is that you would have a control algorithm software, and that software would link the pump and sensor, and the pump would deliver the right amount of insulin at the right time with decreasing personal interaction, less and less time of you spending looking at your CGM, looking at the concentrations and making decisions, reducing the burden. So this is what JDRF has been a pioneer in this area, and we've actually driven the field forward. And one of the ways to do that was, as I think Carl had mentioned at the very beginning, it was not clear. We didn't even know how safe it would be, if you could actually do this, if you could actually have software that could link the pump and sensor and safely control your blood glucose and take you, in a sense, out of the equation to make it easier and reduce the burden. So what we did is we brought together a consortium of phenomenal investigators. These are academics. These people were clinician researchers, engineers, both here in the States and across the world, to test these systems, taking CGMs and pumps, and developing software to see, can you actually control the blood glucose? And these first studies actually were not long ago, as Dr. Greenbaum mentioned, just in the last 10 years. The first studies were short, very short duration because they were restricted to a hospital room. You can see the person here lying down in bed. There were a few patients. They're very, very expensive. And people wore the CGM, you can see, the insulin pump, and then the software around this big laptop. People were just lying down, not real world or anything, but they were groundbreaking because we saw that this really looked as though this would work. Forward now, we've seen dramatic improvements. And in the last years, we've seen incredible improvements in CGM. I think all you're probably noticing how accurate your CGMs are now. And we have now, our trials that are going on now, these people are going for many months, doing their studies at home in the real world. So right now we have people, as we speak, in research projects, wearing artificial pancreas systems that are controlling their blood glucose, and over many months at home. This is huge. This is a dramatic improvement over even just a few years ago, and it's very, very exciting. And as you can see here, this person, instead of wearing a laptop now, he has a CGM, he has his pump, and then the software is running on this little phone here. And so what he can do now is he can go outside, he can eat whatever he wants, do whatever exercise. Contrast that to a few years back, where you had to stay in the hotel, you had to eat a certain amount of food, there was a very precise amount of exercise you could do, very, very limited. We have come so far, so quickly with the artificial pancreas system and the artificial pancreas approach. It's really, really exciting. And you can see now that it's almost the norm. If you go to these international conferences and you hear about the work that many of it, the JDRF has funded, you see this remarkable improvement in time and target, time and control. We've heard of like this glucose variability where you have highs and lows and the whole, what Dr. Hirsch spoke about, this variability. Well, the artificial pancreas will reduce that variability and keep people in tight glucose control. So that's a really an amazing step forward. So this is an example of JDRF working the pipeline. So I mentioned that before, how we are involved at many different steps, and we allocate our resources across the spectrum. Well, here we have JDRF. We brought together all these investigators, these phenomenal researchers from all the best institutions around here in the States and the world to test these algorithms, to develop, to start this process of taking these algorithms and testing them in the hospital and with the CGMs and the pumps. And they did that, and they've done really well. And we also had connected them with our coordinating center that we manage in Florida, the JABE Center, where we also did clinical studies. Part of our work in the pipeline is working with other funding organizations to leverage all the dollars that we get to JDRF, leveraging other funding as well to make sure that we can not only do get these studies done, but do them appropriately with the amount of funds that are available. And we've also worked very, very closely with the NIH to leverage their deep pockets as well. One thing that we consider a success is when we fund smaller studies that show true promise and are very exciting, the NIH comes in and starts to add more money to that and actually expand and allow us to do even larger studies. And then the FDA, part of that work in the pipeline is our relationship with the FDA. When I showed you those pictures of people working, lying in the hospital bed, those initial studies, those were very, very difficult to do because of the challenges with the FDA. The FDA was very, very hesitant about the safety of these systems. People did not know much about how safe they were. And so it was practically impossible to even do these studies. There was no path forward, there was no guidelines. So JDRF brought together a group of key opinion leaders, experts in the field, to establish or to provide a path, create a set of guidelines. What are the critical studies that need to be done to take an artificial pancreas through the various steps to a product? And this has actually reduced the barriers, the burdens, and actually has made it easier and created a path for industry to start developing these devices. And then scientists, researchers are great, making the proof of concept, but the whole thing relies now on companies going forward, using the data, using the information, and creating devices, creating artificial pancreas systems. So we are then, therefore, at the beginning, at the center of this very important pipeline, targeting every aspect of that to make sure we can bring forward these. And this is kind of a principle that JDRF has, not just with artificial pancreas, but all the various therapeutic strategies we have. So for artificial pancreas, it's been very, very exciting. You may have seen a year or so ago, we had a 6-box pathway to the artificial pancreas. Well, there's been so much progress, and things have been going so much faster that we now actually have a more simplified version. And what it comprises of is the suspend function, box 1 and 2, and then 3A and 3B. Box 1 and 2 are suspend and predictive suspend. So these are devices where you wear the CGM device and the pump, and the CGM just tells the pump, if you're getting low, switch the pump off. So you've crossed the threshold, and it switches off the pump for a period of time. And there's a product, I think it's called the 530G. Internationally, it's called the VEO system. And this has been quite amazing. There's a study we funded in Australia with Dr. Tim Jones, where he looked at people who had hypoglycemia unawareness. And he compared people who had hypoglycemia unawareness wearing the VEO versus people who did not wear the VEO and had hypoglycemia unawareness. In that study, 0 episodes of severe hypoglycemia in people wearing the threshold suspend. Quite dramatic. So protection, this device provides protection against severe hypoglycemia episodes. Another product that's coming out, already available now, I believe it's in Australia, Denmark, and in the UK, and it's in the works to come here to the States, is a device, Medtronic will probably be the first ones out with something like this, but this is a device that is predictive. So remember this, the threshold suspend was a threshold. You cross a number, you switch off. These are now a kind of applying more sophisticated algorithms, sophisticated approaches to look further into the future, to be even more preventive of hypoglycemia. And even so more effectively prevent hypo than this threshold suspend. So this is very exciting as well. And we've actually funded some of the research in Australia and some work at Stanford that was going on in this area. Very, very exciting, and we're hoping to see this very soon being released here in the States. Now, you've seen Medtronic, but we also one of the key things we want to see is a vibrant, thriving marketplace for closed-loop systems. So we want to see other companies in the mix as well to make sure there's a lot of activity going on, and that's a priority for JDRF as well. For 3A, so these two parts now here are just shutting off the insulin, not delivering it. The next big step is the 3A and the 3B. This is where you actually deliver. You increase the amount of insulin, decrease the amount of insulin according to the amounts that you need, not threshold suspend only. And we actually have something coming out there as well. So this is the 670G, and this is anticipated, we understand, like in 2017, the timelines could change, but the idea behind this is you would have a closed-loop system that would now control you within a target range, or control your target, which means that it would, when you need more glucose, when you need more insulin, it would give you more insulin. When you have too much, you're becoming hypo, it would reduce the amount of insulin delivered or even switch it off. So a closed-loop system. This system, though, is not fully closed-loop, it's not fully automated. We're still quite a way from full automation, where you can switch it on and just ignore it and let it do its work, because you still have to bolus for meals for this. The challenge right now is that our insulins are too slow, and so therefore you would still need to give a manual bolus for your meal prior to meals. But a lot of the research now is suggesting that you probably will not have to do that much carb counting. Some of the research we're seeing is that you could probably dial in, say, a small, medium, large meal, for example, and have the artificial pancreas take up the rest of that. So we're finding some research now looking at kind of ways in which you could simplify that effort of not having to count the numbers and so. So this is 3A, and this is the insulin-only approach. But then there's also this potential of 3B, which is multihormonal approaching. So for example, you would have an insulin system, but you could potentially add on glucagon, this kind of rescue glucagon that would be the anti-insulin. So you're providing insulin, but whenever you need a little bit, you give a bit of glucagon as well. And so that's an interesting area too. And we're doing a fair amount of work in that space. It's not clear yet. We want to understand what the benefits of this would be, because for this you need to have a dual-chambered pump, two pumps within the system. You're going to have 2 infusion sets, and some have to work out. So you'd have, come through one. It can't come through one line. Most likely you'll have 2 infusion sets. So it's going to be more complex. So one of the key things that we're interested right now, and with some of the funding that's going more into that direction, is who are the people? What are the key benefits of this, and who would be most likely to benefit from that? And does the increased complexity and the cost justify that? You could also think of other hormones you could put in there as well besides glucagon. So, for example, pramlintide. So these are very interesting approaches. I don't have a picture here because we don't have anything. I don't think there's any kind of commercial path in the works. But Ed Damiano is doing work on some very nice work on bihormonal systems. There's work going on. Jessica Castle's lab in Oregon is doing great work, and also too there's a group at McGill who are looking in this area. So and it's potentially going to be very exciting as well. So talking about working the pipeline, so we're still working the pipeline on this as well. Even though devices are out there, our JDRF's next steps primarily are clinical adoption. We want to see people start using these and them being provided to patients. Predictive suspend this system. Our next steps, we want to see U.S. approval, and so we're monitoring that. We have a group in D.C. that our regulatory group, and they are constantly engaged with the FDA to kind of facilitate the process of approval and to understand the issues. And then reimbursement and clinical adoption. So here we're waiting on this to come out. We know there's studies going on. We're actually funding studies, other closed-loop studies that looking at strategies to even further increase glycemic control. We want to see these in time become smaller because they're less intrusive, less visible to the body. Want to see a better form factor. We're looking here. There's interest in glucagon. So this is an area that's of significant amount of interest, but more so as well now to see what are the true benefits, what's the added advantage, and the pros and cons of having a bihormonal system versus a single hormone system. So we're very excited about that. A tremendous amount of progress, and we'll be literally seeing products in the coming years. Glucose control. So we invested $5 million in glucose control, and this is now non-device-based approaches to improve glycemic control. Better insulins, drugs that are used in type 2 diabetes that may be potentially useful in type 1. One of the things that you've probably heard about is smart insulin. First of all, let me talk a bit more about the Afrezza. I mentioned how insulin is too slow. Current insulin is too slow, and that's why you have to bolus for meals when you use an artificial pancreas, at least the initial versions. We're also very interested in faster insulins, ways in which you could not have to bolus so early before a meal, maybe bolus at the meal time. And also, too, for the artificial pancreas, to respond to be able to respond to meals in real time. Now it's not feasible. So we're all very interested in faster insulins. Now this is just to give you some kind of recent highlights of what's available. You've probably heard of it. Afrezza, this inhaled insulin, is now available, and type 1, people with type 1 can use it. We actually supported some studies in artificial pancreas to see how this may work in conjunction with artificial pancreas. And it looks as though there may be a path forward there. But I wanted to just show you how fast this insulin is. If you look at this line here, the black line, this is the standard insulin of an insulin injection. The red line, it's approximating almost like what your pancreas would do. So you could give yourself a dose of Afrezza, inhale a bit of Afrezza, and have almost instantaneous benefit there from an insulin dose. I was talking just the other day with the colleagues from Yale, and they were saying as well, there may be advantages of this in situations where you don't have, when kids at school, for example, they miss a bolus at mealtime and they don't want to bolus, and they have friends around, they don't want to give themselves an injection. This might be a way of getting around that, just a whiff. Might be something they could be quite happy to do, later in the afternoon when they have a high. Glucose responsive insulin. I think you probably heard about this. JDRF was one of the key funders of Smart Cells. This was a company a number of years ago that was developing an insulin that was glucose responsive. And the concept behind this is that you would inject this insulin into your body, and it would stay there and be inert, not do anything. But the moment your glucose would go up, it would switch on and bring it back down. Right? And so we funded this, and their proof of concept studies were quite successful to the point that Merck acquired them, and now Merck is doing phase 1 studies in this to see the feasibility of this, the safety and feasibility of this before they go forward for additional studies. You can actually Google it or look in clinicaltrials.gov. They have a listing for the clinical trial there. What I wanted to show you, and we're also very interested in this area, so we're funding more broadly as well. And I just want to give you some show you something quite recent. And this is work from Danny Chow's group. He was actually originally at MIT, and now he's at Utah. So here's an example. He did some modifications to the insulin molecule as well. What he did here was he changed it a bit to make sure, added an aliphatic chain so it lasted longer in the body, so it would stay around longer. And also, too, he added a kind of a glucose switch onto it as well. And I want to show you this very nice data. This is just proof of concept now. Smart insulin has a ways to go in terms of development and proof of concept and feasibility and so. But he's established proof of concept for his glucose-responsive insulin in these mice. And I just want to show you, because it's really a cool way to see how it works. And I don't want to confuse you with this complex graph, but what I want to say is, so he was developing different formulations of glucose-responsive insulin, slight modifications, and he wanted to see how they worked in this animal model. If you look at this, the different colors here, the blue, the orange, the red, and the green, those are all slightly different formulations that you used. The black is regular insulin. So you can see when he injected these into the animals, the regular insulin, the animal became hypoglycemic, right? The other glucose-responsive insulins did not, because obviously it switches off at a certain, it's only function at a certain glucose level. Now, 4 hours after the injection, he gave them a glucose dose, gave them a bolus of glucose. And you can see here, especially the red line, which is actually the best formulation, it went up and it brought it right back down, this glucose-responsive insulin. Now he gave us another dose of glucose 7 hours after the injection. Again, up, glucose went up, and the glucose-responsive insulin was there and brought it right back down again. Right? 10 hours after the injection, another dose of glucose came up again and went right back down. So this is the concept of glucose-responsive insulin, where you could have an insulin that you would deliver to the body, it would stay there, and it would work whenever you needed it. And that would mean you would be able to inject it less frequently, maybe once a day, twice a day, but then it would account for meals, so you wouldn't have to do a bolus for another meal, for example. So this is very exciting. We could think this could be groundbreaking. It's a high-risk, high-reward situation because we still have a long way to go to see if this will work actually in people and it would be feasible, but it's very, very exciting. Encapsulation. So last year we invested $13 million in encapsulation. And as you know, in type 1 diabetes, what happens is the beta cells of a person with type 1 diabetes are attacked by the immune system. And the immune system then, they deplete the beta cells and many people have no beta cells at all. The idea behind encapsulation is to replace beta cells, but replace them in a way that they're protected from this attack by the immune system. So you take these exogenous beta cells here and put them in a cage, a protective cage, where they could release the insulin, get all the nutrients they have from the outside, but be protected from this immune attack. And the interesting thing here is if you're protected from the immune attack, it means you can put many different kinds of beta cells there. You don't have to put your own beta cells. You can even put porcine beta cells, other kinds of beta cells that could be put in there to protect against, to provide insulin. So one of the cool things that came out recently was ways in which you could get beta cell sources. How much beta cells? Because before, people would do beta cell transplants, islet transplants, but these are very, very limited amounts, very difficult to get them, and very few people could obviously get these transplants. So one of the key areas, one of the most important areas, is to kind of develop large sources of beta cells. These are cells that could release insulin that you could then encapsulate and implant into the body. And a really interesting paper came out from Doug Melton. It was in Cell, got a lot of press, on ways in which you could actually create mature beta cells. And the way he did this was taking from human embryonic stem cells and taking them through a process. So here are the stem cells. He's taken them through and provided various signals at various steps of the way to take them through this lineage to bring them through to a fully mature beta cell. So now this, and other groups are doing this as well, where you can create actually potentially unlimited amounts of beta cells that you can put then in encapsulated systems. So this is very exciting as well. So here you have to have the beta cells for encapsulation, so you need to find out ways in which you can make large amounts of beta cells. These have to be replenishable because you need to make more of them. They have to function well in the system, and they should be able to make large amounts. And people are making, can you see there's lots of progress towards that. The other side of the equation now is to create the cage, to make it protective. And so here you want to put the beta cells in here, but you don't want the immune system to start attacking them. And you want these beta cells to work. You want them to escape the immune rejection. You want them to survive for a long time because you want to have the implant there for as long as possible. And you want the insulin to be able to be reduced normally back and forth to give you a sense, essentially, what your pancreas would have been producing. So a lot of work has been going on in this area as well. You've probably heard about the ViaCyte trial that has been going on, and they've actually implanted, they've introduced beta cells into their Encaptra system, and they've implanted that into people. And that's very exciting. That's actually underway right now. I think there are 40 patients who have undergone the implantation. I think it's UCSD. Or UCSD it was started there, and I think Alberta now is another site. And they're looking at initial kind of preliminary safety and feasibility of the approach. But we should be getting some information about that maybe in 2016. So this is very exciting. This could be quite transformational as well, because there you would have a system where you would implant this kind of cage with beta cells in there, and that would then allow you not to have to bolus for meals and to provide yourself insulin. It will be a physiological way of restoring insulin. Prevention. So in prevention, we invested $14 million in this area last year, and the goal here is really to create a vaccine. So you want to kind of, it's not enough to cure the disease, or not enough to treat, or we need to also eliminate the disease, prevent it completely. So we want to do a vaccine. And so I think one of the interesting things here that we see now, a lot of the research and the funding here has been going into understand what the autoantigens are, what are the causes, what precipitates type 1 diabetes. And we're hearing more and more about the microbiome, and you may have heard about this as well. Recent papers suggest that the microbiome, the gut microflora, the various bacteria you have in the gut, that composition changes. And they've found that up to a year before people develop type 1 diabetes, they can identify changes in the gut microflora, the composition, the populations of bacteria that are in the gut. This is very, very interesting. This might provide us with ways in which for diagnostic approaches, to diagnose, to predict, but also and they haven't identified a causal effect. They've found an association, but there's a tremendous amount of interest here, and this could also help us understand a bit more about what are the triggers for type 1 diabetes. Restoration. So we spent in 2014 $31 million towards restoration. And this would be the true cure for type 1 diabetes, where you would have beta cells that would not be they'd be resistant to immune attack. You'd have solved the immune attack problem. You'd have the beta cells. And there are lots of hints that this could be feasible. This is doable. I mean, also Dr. Hirsch mentioned about people who have had type 1 diabetes for many years and still have beta cells there. What is it that allows those beta cells to be there? What are the mechanisms that allow that, and how can we harness those mechanisms to kind of increase that and have a population of beta cells in the body that escapes that? So those are very interesting questions. We also know from pregnancy, women who are pregnant also increase their amounts of beta cells, and this is another interesting thing as well. How can we learn from that and to capitalize on this increase in women who have type 1 diabetes? What are the signals? What are the mechanisms there? So these are key areas that we want to address. So and also to how ultimately to impact on the immune response. So we're focused here on beta cell survival, regeneration, and blocking the immune response. A lot of the work on beta cell survival now in this area has been on prevention of beta cell stress. When there are small amounts of beta cells in the body and there's lots of demand for insulin, the beta cells tend to work a lot, and that kind of tires them out, and that can also cause them to die. So if there are ways in which you could prevent beta cell stress and make those beta cells more resistant to the stress, you could potentially use that as a way of increasing beta cell survival. So this is a very important area as well. So we're working on very, very interesting areas, very key areas towards curing, treating, and preventing the disease. These are key areas: artificial pancreas. I didn't speak about complications, but the Pearl trial and going down to DC in 2 days. That's part of complications to kind of prevent diabetic nephropathy or advanced kidney disease. Encapsulation, glucose control, restoration, prevention. And I feel this is probably one of the most. This are really, really exciting times. I think Dr. Greenbaum mentioned how far we've come, and it's really true. I think she really captured how much momentum there is in all of these different areas, and it's really exciting. It's actually quite an honor to be at JDRF, to be able to see this and to be in the research department, in the research group, and seeing what's coming down the pike. So you see a lot of stuff that's presented and for public consumption. But actually being within JDRF, you actually see even before public consumption. That's very, very exciting. So we work the pipeline. Coming back to this idea that we work the whole pipeline, the whole spectrum, we have a very holistic approach to this disease. It's been said that to bring forward a therapy, it costs about $1 billion. It's very, very expensive to create therapies. And as we go down the pipeline, it gets more and more expensive. JDRF has been investing about, I would say, $100 million a year in research. And but we've been also working very hard to leverage the efforts of other organizations. We're partnering with other groups to make sure that the dollars that we receive that are donated to JDRF are multiplied in terms of the amounts of other opportunities, the other organizations that help us and are focused in this process as well. So we have a very broad, diverse portfolio. We need that because type 1 diabetes is a very complex disease, and we're tackling it from all angles. We have great research and development expertise, both within JDRF and also to people like Dr. Carla Greenbaum, Dr. Earl Hirsch, and all the amazing researchers around the world. We work with the brightest and the best from all the best universities, absolutely the brightest and the best. It's an honor to work with them as well to kind of bring forward these approaches. And it's really, really important. Part of the pipeline is you, volunteers, people that bring us forward in many different ways to help us take us from through funding and for participation in our clinical trials, for volunteer expertise, to carry us through and help us and assist us through in this whole process of working the pipeline. So we're all very much critical parts of this process. We have broad international reach. We have research going on around the world. We have research going on in Australia, in Europe, Canada, everywhere. Wherever there is the best scientific minds, the best research, we're there. And we're funding those efforts and leveraging those efforts as well for additional funding too. And we have research partnerships. The NIH, we've been working very, very closely with the NIH and also other organizations as well to accelerate progress. So we have a vision, we have a plan, we have the capabilities, and underlying all of that is your support. So thank you, and if there are any questions, if I can answer anything, I'd be very happy to.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Pragnell. I think we do have time for a few questions. There's one in the back right now.
Yes, I'm curious about the vaccination. If I get a vaccination for polio or measles, it turns on my immune system to go and attack those. But since with diabetes, the problem is too much immune system, I'm wondering what the vaccine means.
Yeah, so we're still at quite early stages, but what we do need to understand is what causes, what elicits type 1 diabetes. Could it be, for example, certain autoantigens that are the key factors? Could it be the gut microflora? So it's not clear, but there is a path forward in terms of vaccination. And once we understand the process, the mechanisms, we're quite confident that will be something we can resolve.
Great. Another question over here.
Hi, this is a bit mechanical, I suppose, but with the continuous glucose monitor paired with an insulin pump, I have a 17-year-old who's not taking great care of himself lately, and he does wear a pump. He's not terrific about bolusing when he needs to. He also probably isn't terrific about changing his infusion site when he needs to, as often as he needs to. The idea of a pairing between the two seems great to me because that would take less, control by him to make his blood sugars better. But the idea of him having to wear two sites, change two things, with a 17-year-old who's been living with diabetes for 13 plus years, I could see him saying, no way, if somebody mentioned that to him as an option. So is there any plan to put those into one site?
Yeah.
And make it less burdensome for the person who's got to do this every 2-3 days?
Yeah. So we think there are a lot of things that create burden. I mean, the artificial pancreas will be a huge step forward, but it's not going to completely eliminate burden. There's going to be something there to wear, and you don't want that. Key things we're focused on: form factor, making it smaller, less obvious. We're also interested in infusion sets. Right now infusion sets only last, 3 days? We want to kind of have infusion sets last longer. We don't want to have multiple sites. We hear that over and over again, it's too much real estate. It's taking too much of my body. And we want to see single site infusion and sensing. Right now, you can probably Google it, there's the combo set. I think Medtronic is making it. It's available out in Europe. It's almost like a snake bite kind of thing where it's almost like the transmitter, but you put it on your body. It has it's an infusion set, but it also has a sensing component to it as well. And so that's the closest thing we have now to a single site. But there's lots of effort going on now to see, can we create a single site sensing and infusion? And also, too, on top of that, why not create something like a patch pump that is just everything is done in the patch, not tubing and so on. So we're very aware of that, and that's a key aspect of reducing the burden of type 1 diabetes. I know Dr. Corey Hood and I think Dr. Michael Harris there are going to probably talk more about the burden of type 1 diabetes, and I'm sure that's probably one of the key issues as well. The answer is yes. There's going to be, I think for artificial pancreas systems, it's almost like when we had the original cell phone, how big it was, like a brick, and now we all have iPhones. I think they're going to have progress like that, where we're going to see things get smaller, more easier to use, less invasive, less obvious, but it will take time.
Question over here. Can you wait till we get the microphone so everybody can hear the question? Thank you. Volunteers are getting a workout today. It's a big room.
So I had a question about the Afrezza, the inhaled insulin. Is this something like where it'd be open to any type 1 diabetic, or is there like special qualifications to get it?
I'm not aware of any qualifications other than that because it's inhaled. I think there is some question about whether people who are heavy smokers or so on or have lung issues should use it. But I'm not aware of any kind of significant restrictions. It should be it would be very effective. You can take this like immediately before a meal, almost at mealtime, and have very effective control. We did some work with closed loop systems, and I think it shows a lot of promise there.
Got a question over here?
Sure.
Yeah.
Are there any advancements being made in the way of like
There you go.
Question was around advancements in blood glucose testing.
Yeah, advances in blood glucose testing. Well, there's been some discussion at the regulatory level in DC about accuracy of blood glucose monitors and to raise the level of accuracy. I think the one really cool step that I think might be somewhere in between blood glucose monitors and CGM is this new Abbott Libre, which is a system. I'm sure probably many of you have heard about. This is now available in Europe. This is a system. It's a patch you put on. It has a kind of like a sensor. You wear it, and then you don't calibrate. You have a kind of a little monitor here, and every time you put your monitor over the surface, it takes a reading. I think it lasts for up to 2 weeks. You put it on, you can check as many times as you want, right? And I believe, my understanding is quite accurate. So this is actually, I think, probably in terms of blood glucose monitoring, that's probably the most exciting development, where you actually don't have to do a finger stick. So it's the Abbott Libre, Libre. If you just Google it, you'll see it's very, very exciting. Actually, it's so popular now that they can barely make enough of them, and they're actually doing a lot more now. And hopefully, one of these days might come to the States. It's available in Europe without a prescription. And it's getting lots of people excited about it because it's very convenient.
something that might be available here?
I think something like that quite likely probably will be available here. I'm not sure what the path forward is for that, but yeah.
All right, we probably have time for one last question, and I see a hand right in the middle of the room.
Yep.
Sorry, we have one.
Just really curious about the beta packs and about where they're going to be implanted and about how long approximately they'll last.
That's a good question. These are questions that are actually trying to address. What volume of beta cells will be necessary and how long they will last. JDRF is funding a lot of efforts in this area because you obviously have to have multiple shots on goal. So we're looking at different ways of encapsulation, whether you want to encapsulate a large in a device, or do you want to take beta cells in small clumps and encapsulate those? So we're focusing on this area. We don't think that we think that ViaCyte is fantastic. We're very excited about it, but we're making sure that we look at this at many angles as possible, and these are questions that definitely need to be addressed.
So I pictured in my head like polywogs reproducing inside a little pack, and do they max out? Because you were talking about how you would hope they would keep reproducing.
Not necessarily reproducing. So I think the thought is that these would not be permanent, that they would have a long lifespan. They will be implanted, like in the doctor's office, for example, and last for ideally 6 months to a year or more, as many months as possible. We don't know yet how long. What's not clear is how long and how many cells are necessary. But what they have done is they're able now to create cells in an encapsulated system that's protected from the immune system, and these cells can produce insulin. The big questions now is how many cells, how long, and what the form factor will be.
All right, great. Thank you very much,
Okay,
Dr.
thank you.
Pragnell. It was wonderful.
Okay.